December 7th, 1941, 7:55 a.m. Japanese bombers reach Pearl Harbor searching for America's aircraft carriers. But when they arrive, every carrier is gone. Not one is in the harbor. Japan planned to destroy battleships and carriers in one strike. They crushed the battleships. 4 sunk, 4 damaged. But the carriers, the real threat, were missing. And that changed World War II. This story is not about what was hit. It is about what survived and where the carriers actually were that morning. If even one carrier had been docked, it would have been destroyed. America would have lost its strike power. Japan could have controlled the Pacific, but timing, weather, and missions pulled the carriers away. You will see Enterprise just 200 miles from the attack, Lexington far out on a secret mission, Saratoga arriving in California as the bombs fell. Japan attacked battleships, but the ships that would later destroy Japan's navy were already at sea. November 1941, Japan finishes its plan to hit Pearl Harbor. The main targets are the battleships and the aircraft carriers. Destroy both, and America cannot fight back for years. Japanese intelligence watches the US Navy every day. They know where the battleships sit. They think they know the carrier schedules. They believe all 3 Pacific carriers will be in port on December 7th. They are wrong. In 1941, America has 7 fleet carriers and 1 auxiliary carrier. Only Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga are in the Pacific. Japan builds its whole attack plan around sinking these 3. Imagine planning a robbery and knowing when the vault will be full. You break in, but the vault is empty. That is what happened to Japan. A Japanese spy watches Pearl Harbor for months, but in late November, all 3 carriers leave, and he loses them. Japanese commanders move toward Hawaii in radio silence, but they feel rising worry. What if the carriers are not there? So where were they? The answer starts with the carrier that came closest to danger. On November 28, 1941, the USS Enterprise leaves Pearl Harbor for a secret mission. As it moves west toward Wake Island, the crew has no idea this trip will save their lives. Because if Enterprise stayed in port even one more day, it would have been destroyed in the attack. During this mission, the carrier must deliver 12 Marine F-4F Wildcat fighters to Wake. So the ship operates under wartime rules, with radio silence and armed patrols. Under Admiral Bull Halsey, the sailors stay alert as they move deeper into the Pacific. It feels like taking a simple trip that by pure timing keeps you away from danger at home. And that timing becomes critical when bad weather slows the task force. Because the destroyers need fuel, Enterprise cannot return on December 6th as planned. Instead, she remains 200 miles west of Oahu on the morning of December 7th. As the ship nears Hawaii, she launches 18 scout bombers ahead of her. At that same moment, Japanese bombers lift off toward Pearl Harbor. So when Enterprise's planes reach Oahu, they fly straight into the attack. Some are shot down by Japanese Zeros, while others fall to American anti-aircraft fire. But even with those losses, the carrier herself stays safe at sea. And because she survives, her pilots score the first American kill of the Pacific War. As soon as Enterprise receives news of the attack, Admiral Halsey orders a counterstrike. With that order, every pilot prepares to launch. For hours after takeoff, Enterprise's aircraft search the ocean for the Japanese carriers. But as they fly farther out, they find nothing, because by then the Japanese fleet is already retreating at high speed. When night falls, Enterprise must bring her planes home. But because the attack shattered normal procedures, the crew attempts the first night carrier landing in US history. Most bombers return safely, but 6 fighters head toward Pearl Harbor instead. And in the confusion, American gunners shoot them down, killing 3 US pilots. It feels like firefighters rushing into danger, only to be mistaken for enemies in the smoke. The next day, Enterprise enters Pearl Harbor, and her crew sees the devastation. Burning oil, capsized ships, and wreckage everywhere. That sight fuels their anger, and within 48 hours, they strike back. On December 10th, an Enterprise scout bomber spots Japanese submarine 70 on the surface. Because the sub cannot dive fast enough, the bomber drops a bomb that disables it. Hours later, another bomber returns and lands a 1,000-pound hit, sinking the sub in minutes. This becomes the first Japanese warship destroyed by American aircraft in World War II. And because Enterprise was not in port, she becomes the Navy's most decorated carrier of the entire war. But while Enterprise was fighting back, another giant was hundreds of miles from Pearl Harbor, the carrier Lexington. On December 5, 1941, USS Lexington leaves Pearl Harbor for a simple ferry mission. Midway, the crew thinks it is just another routine trip, because their task is clear: deliver 18 Marine dive bombers and return home. But without knowing it, they are sailing away from the attack that will destroy the harbor. At this moment, Lexington travels with 3 cruisers and 5 destroyers as Task Force 12. By December 7th, she is nearly 1,800 miles from Pearl Harbor. So while she moves across calm seas, her home base is under attack. Suddenly, the radio room receives the message: Air Raid Pearl Harbor. This is no drill. Because of that signal, the mission is canceled at once. Right away, Lexington launches scout planes to search for the Japanese fleet. But after hours of flying, the pilots find nothing. And as they return, they know only one thing: Lexington survived by accident, not design. Now, with 2 carriers accounted for, the final one wasn't even in the Pacific when the attack began. On December 7th, 1941, 8 o'clock a.m. Pacific Time, USS Saratoga is pulling into San Diego after months in dry dock. As she slows toward the pier, the crew prepares to load fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes. But before the work begins, the radio breaks the morning calm. Pearl Harbor under attack. At that moment, excitement turns into shock, because instead of staying in port, Saratoga is ordered back to sea within 24 hours. She loads 14 Marine Buffalo fighters and emergency supplies, all meant for Wake Island, also under attack. As she races west, storms and refueling delays slow her progress. By December 21st, Saratoga is only hundreds of miles from Wake. But before she arrives, Japanese carriers Soryu and Hiryu strike first. On December 22nd, the rescue mission is canceled. Wake Island falls on December 23rd, and Saratoga turns back too late to save the Marines. Yet the aircraft she carried, those 14 Buffalo fighters, would later help defend Midway, the turning point of the Pacific War. Now, with all 3 Pacific carriers accounted for, the story shifts to the carriers in the Atlantic. While Pearl Harbor burned, 4 U.S. carriers sat thousands of miles away in the Atlantic Ocean: Ranger, Yorktown, Wasp, Hornet, and the auxiliary carrier Long Island. They were positioned there to guard convoys against German U-boats and support Britain's survival. But as the attack unfolded, none of them could cross the country fast enough to help. Ranger was returning to Norfolk. Yorktown was already docked there. Wasp was anchored off Bermuda. Hornet was newly commissioned and still unprepared for combat. Long Island remained at Norfolk as well. It was like having backup on the wrong battlefield: powerful, ready, but unreachable. Yorktown moved first, leaving Norfolk on December 16th and reaching the Pacific in early 1942. She would fight at Coral Sea and fall at Midway, proving how urgently America needed carriers. By mid-1942, Wasp and Hornet followed west, with Hornet launching the daring Doolittle raid on Tokyo. Meanwhile, the two-ocean war stretched the Navy to its limit, forcing carriers to cover crises an ocean apart. And with the Atlantic carriers too far away, Japan believed its strike on Pearl Harbor had wiped out America's Pacific power. But the truth was far more dangerous. For months before the attack, Japanese intelligence tracked U.S. ship movements relentlessly. Spy Takeo Yoshikawa reported daily from Honolulu, noting every battleship, every cruiser, every departure. But in late November, the carriers slipped away at Prato, and Japan suddenly had no idea where they went. Japanese commanders waited nervously, hoping the carriers would return by December 7th. Yet as the attack began, uncertainty hung over the entire operation. Then the radio call came: no carriers in port. Some pilots urged a search, but Admiral Chuichi Nagumo refused. He feared the carriers might be waiting just beyond the horizon. It was like setting a perfect trap for a lion and missing the lion entirely. Nagumo chose retreat, leaving without confirming their location. That single decision saved Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga. If Japan had found them, 6 Japanese carriers would have crushed 3 scattered American carriers easily. But instead, both sides searched blindly across the Pacific, neither finding the other. And 6 months later, the carriers Nagumo failed to destroy would destroy him at Midway, which raises the final question: what did their survival truly change? When Pearl Harbor burned, Japan believed it had delivered a total victory. 4 battleships sunk, 4 damaged, thousands dead, the Pacific Fleet crippled, or so they thought. But Japan made a fatal mistake. They destroyed yesterday's weapons, while the real weapons sailed free. In 1941, navies still worshipped battleships, yet the war ahead would belong entirely to aircraft carriers. Japan hit 8 battleships but missed 3 modern carriers, the only ships that truly mattered. It was like smashing an old device while the opponent kept the machine that actually controls the fight. Of the 8 battleships struck, 6 were raised, repaired, and returned to service. Only Arizona and Oklahoma were permanent losses. The crippling blow was temporary, but the escaped carriers were permanent threats. Within 6 months, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga were joined by Yorktown and Hornet. Together, they formed the force that defeated Japan at Coral Sea and Midway. Outside, Japan celebrated victory. Inside, American carriers were already planning revenge. And exactly 6 months later, Japan lost 4 carriers, proving Yamamoto's warning true. When we rewind the clock, the margin of survival becomes terrifyingly thin. If Enterprise had not been slowed by storms, she would have returned on December 6th and died on December 7th. If Lexington's ferry mission had launched a week later, she would have been tied to a pier during the attack. If Saratoga's refit finished 1 month earlier, she would have been docked at Battleship Row itself. Enterprise's delay came from refueling destroyers, a simple 6-hour slowdown. Those 6 hours placed her 200 miles at sea instead of in the line of fire. It was like missing a doomed flight because you stopped for fuel. The delay that frustrates you becomes the decision that saves you. Some argue the Navy anticipated danger, but records show the missions were routine. The timing pure coincidence. Had Japan attacked on November 30th, all 3 carriers would have been in port. Had they attacked on December 14th, Enterprise and Lexington would have already returned. December 7th was the only day all 3 carriers were safely away. Outside, historians debate fate. Inside, the truth is chilling. America survived by hours and miles, and 6 months later, those same carriers delivered the blow Japan never expected. June 4th to 7th, 1942. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the surviving carriers sailed toward Midway Atoll. Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet, the ships Japan failed to destroy, now hunt the Japanese fleet. They are outnumbered. They are outgunned. But Japan has no idea they are waiting in the shadows. Japan brings 4 carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. America brings 3. And in a single, unbelievable strike on June 4th, U.S. dive bombers sink all 4 Japanese carriers. Japan loses over 3,000 men and 248 aircraft. The Pacific War flips in 6 minutes. It feels like a robbery victim tracking down the criminals and taking everything back with interest. 2 of the carriers destroyed. Soryu and Hiryu helped attack Pearl Harbor. Now they fall to the carriers they failed to find. Yorktown fights until the end, absorbing bombs and torpedoes before sinking on June 7th. But her sacrifice cripples Japan's strike force. Outside Midway is a naval battle. Inside it is poetic justice, the survivors of Pearl Harbor destroying the attackers. And from this moment on, Japan's carrier power never recovers. The untold truth of Pearl Harbor is this: Japan destroyed the wrong ships. They sank battleships that belonged to an older era, but missed the carriers that would define the entire war. Because of a storm, a refueling delay, and a routine ferry mission, all 3 U.S. Pacific carriers were safely at sea on December 7th. Those small, insignificant moments, barely noticed at the time, became the turning points of history. Japanese pilots flew across 3,500 miles expecting to find America's carriers lined up in port. Instead, they saw empty berths, empty docks, and empty water. That single moment of confusion, that unexpected absence, marked the beginning of Japan's defeat. For months, Japan celebrated a perfect victory, not realizing the real weapons had survived. And 6 months later, those same carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the newly arrived Yorktown, struck back at Midway. In 6 decisive minutes, American dive bombers destroyed 4 Japanese carriers and shattered Japan's naval power. The ships Japan failed to sink became the ships that won the Pacific War. The carriers that escaped Pearl Harbor became the backbone of America's Pacific fight. Enterprise rose to become the most decorated ship in U.S. history. Lexington fought at Coral Sea before being lost in 1942. Saratoga survived the entire war and returned home victorious. Their absence on December 7th wasn't luck alone. It was timing that allowed America to strike back. You just uncovered where each carrier was that morning. Enterprise at sea, Lexington on a ferry mission, Saratoga entering San Diego. You saw how weather delays, routine orders, and repair schedules saved the Pacific Fleet's only strike force. And you learned how those same carriers turned Japan's victory into strategic failure at Midway. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe. History hides countless truths like this. Now tell me, was their survival pure luck? Or did someone know the attack was coming?